Hi, this is Sean Lewis from Journeys Worldwide. Today we're going to be talking with Dr. Jimmy White. Jimmy is an Australian scientist, educator, and expedition leader. Jimmy has been working with National Geographic and other organizations around the world, and now he is focusing closer to home. Jimmy is based out of Brisbane, and one of his great passions is the Great Barrier Reef, which is what we'll be talking about today. Jimmy's also been working up in Papua New Guinea, but we'll probably talk to him about that another day. So, Jimmy, great to have you on board. You've been traveling quite a bit and back in Brisbane now, I gather.
Yeah, I've actually just bounced out of quarantine from Papua New Guinea. So I did quarantine for 2 weeks in Cairns, quick couple of days to Brisbane, and now I'm back in Cairns.
Oh, awesome. Heading out to Papua New Guinea again, or are you going to be doing the reef, or what's your plan?
I'm actually heading out to the Great Barrier Reef for the next 3 days leading up to Christmas. We're doing a cosmetics commercial for the States. One of the great things actually that's come out of COVID is that the local industries for film and for talent are being used. So rather than bringing in people from internationally to fill these roles, we'll be able to support the Australian film industry, which has been phenomenal for production.
Oh, that's great that there's something positive coming out of all this. And I gather you've been pretty busy with all of this as well now.
Yeah, it's been interesting. So at the start of the year, obviously I was in Antarctica um, early January and February, had some time off in the States, and my friends work for the CDC, and they were talking about this thing coming out of China, and they weren't sure what it was yet. They hadn't named it, but it was bad. And they actually found the first patient zero coming into the US. And we went from there to the Falkland Islands in South Georgia on the National Geographic Explorer. And halfway through that trip, we started to see the countries respond with their border closures. And by March 8th, we pretty much locked down and we were returning to Australia. What's been phenomenal coming out of quarantine in Australia is that we now have some of the best access to tourist sites anywhere in the world, which are on our doorstep, but there's nobody there. It's almost like turning the travel back 30 years where you can go and see some of these places in really intimate experiences. What I've been specializing in the last decade was taking film crews and research teams and things like super yachts and that top 1% of people into places that you only see in National Geographic or you only see on the BBC series. That kind of guiding and those expeditions now in COVID have become to the forefront because you want to travel in a bubble. You want to travel with only people you know. You want to quarantine before. You want to have an evacuation plan. And then more than ever, you want to choose who you're interacting with when you're on these expeditions. So at the moment, it's for COVID, but previously it was a high-end individual. It might have been for privacy. It might have been for security if we're dealing with foreign diplomats. And all of that experience is now coming to tailoring these trips in places like Papua New Guinea and Northern Australia, where we can go out and access these sites, but we're very much in a bubble, you know, this new term, in the bubble, but
Yeah.
between four and 10 people, and then carefully choreographing that so that from about 72 hours before you leave your door until about 72 hours after you return home, there's someone working with you the whole way through the expedition. You have the autonomy to do things within it and make plenty of decisions, but the speed at which the environment moves now, we've just seen, this has been recorded on Tuesday, the 22nd of December. We've seen the Northern Sydney cluster grow, and within 12 hours, we have state borders changing their legislations. And to be off on a holiday, and you need to delegate somebody to deal with the travel arrangements for you.
And I think that's important as well. If you have somebody who knows what they're doing, who can understand what's going on around you, and knows what to do when things actually do hit the fan, as they have done, and be able to get you out of these scenarios. And I think with your experience and a lot of people like yourself who are able to get people out and moving quickly and reacting, it's very important.
Yeah, well, as you know, like, there's lots of people from around the world who have now come back to Australia from their travels, and I'm used to working in places like Russia, Middle East, a little bit of East Africa, and then down in Antarctica. These are incredibly dynamic environments where there's one part of the job which is a guide, to have that immersive experience and bring people to those wild places, have interactions with animals and with spaces, and to reconnect them with those wild places. But the other part of it, the back of the house, is, you know, what's going on with the environment, what's going on with local population, what are the airports doing, how can you move, you know, all those things that we've done around the world for the last decade. Now we can use those skill sets in our own backyard. And that type of experience, it's very, very hard for someone to upskill that during the pandemic in the last 8 months, if you haven't been dealing with, you know, 3 airline strikes a day in Buenos Aires and a crashing economy in Venezuela. Unless you understand what that looks like, and it's hard to go from traveling around Australia doing small groups to trying to travel during a pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I can understand that. And you've done a lot of work with National Geographic and the likes of that, so that's given you a lot of really good experience in dealing with some of the best places in the world. And you've now decided to come back and sort of concentrate on the Great Barrier Reef and Papua New Guinea. Am I right?
Yeah, so I've been extremely fortunate to work firstly with the film crews for BBC, National Geographic, and then the last couple of years working with National Geographic expeditions and Lindblad expeditions to sort of harness this idea of expedition travel to wild places. And the mentorship we had with the team that worked within there, from the naturalists to the officers, the bridge teams, the seamen, it's such an incredibly enriching environment for someone like me who's going out into the world and trying to learn as much as possible. But what I kept seeing over and over, you know, we traveled from Easter Island all the way across to Tahiti up to Hawaii on some of the most remote and pristine reefs on the planet. And no one had the fish assemblage that we see on the Great Barrier Reef. You know, there are pockets of very good coral, or there might be a few really great pelagic spaces. But to go and do a dive where you have an intact assemblage from top predators to mesopredators, I just couldn't find anywhere else like that except for the Great Barrier Reef. And then we also have the charismatic megafauna with manta rays and with minke whales coming every year, and of course the humpback migrations. And so it's a bit of a Carl Jung journey. You know, you go out into the world and you want to have your hero's journey and see all the things, and you realize that home was always the place that had everything you're looking for. You just need.
I think that's been quite an eye-opener for myself, and actually a lot of the clients that I've been talking to over the last couple of weeks, is just how much there is available back here that people had no idea about, and people haven't traveled, and now they're being wanting to travel, but they're being forced to travel locally, and suddenly realizing there's a phenomenal experiences and attractions out here, and the Great Barrier Reef obviously being one of the most amazing. And you did a lot of your a lot of training and research on the reef as well, didn't you?
Yeah, so both my PhD and my postdoc were focused on, PhD was looking at connectivity of sharks and the role that the marine park plays in conserving them, working with commercial fisheries and with the marine park managers. And then my postdoc was looking at the movement of minke whales. And the team was from the Dwarf Minke Whale Project, and we were the first to apply tagging while being in the water with the whales, which was really incredible experience. And again, that amazing mentor group with storied people who had done years and years of that to make those experiences possible. And recently I've been working with the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority, and they have this, it truly is a tremendous program. It's called the Master Reef Guides. And what the Marine Park has done is identify the idea of having these top guides around the world. And you would know from your experience, you go to somewhere like Machu Picchu or the Masai Mara, and you have these individuals that make the trip. You can
Absolutely.
go to Sungate, Machu Picchu, but unless it's the right person with you, unless it's the right person in the car with you on safari and who's reading the animals and knows to put you where and to stay when you need to stay or go when you have to go. And so the Marine Park really has taken a forward step in developing this program. And so very, very fortunate to work with the Master Reef Guides over the last year and see through their eyes the Marine Park, which I knew so well, and how it's changed in response to climate change, but also a lot of the conservation success stories on our doorstep.
Well, it's always good to hear success stories, because all we ever hear in the news, obviously, is just the bad stuff. But there's quite a bit of good stuff out there as well, isn't there?
Yeah, look, I think the thing that's going to come from COVID, we are so fortunate to spend time with each other in contact and, like, ironically enough, off Zoom. And we're now more mindful and present. Like, we have this ability to be grateful to have gatherings of more than 4 people. Like, we have gratitude for that. We have gratitude to share a meal together. And so the ability to travel safely in a country like Australia and also to our neighbours, New Zealand and the Solomons and Papua New Guinea, we're dealing with some of the oldest civilizations, the oldest cultures on this planet are right here in Queensland and New Guinea. There is history and there's rock art that we, on the Master Reef Guides program, we had one of the lecturers was Professor Sean from James Cook University. And he walked us through archaeological sites which are now being understood. I've walked past these sites for 20 years, naively, and not knowing the context and not knowing what they were or the significance of the story. And to work with someone who has such a great insight into it, it goes back to that, what is the guide doing in the place? And I've walked these places for 20 years. I've led trips in these places for a decade. And yet with this one person, he gives you the interpretation from new science and new understanding that changes how you experience the environment. And then for a guide, when you take people there, then you can start to include that in your interpretation and in their experience.
It was amazing. I remember actually having been a guide myself, and it was only after I'd been guiding probably for about 10 years. And then we did a trip through Namibia, and we went with a number of different guides through different areas. And I could see the difference that the knowledgeable guides, or not necessarily even the knowledgeable ones, but the ones who can open up and actually present that story to you and just who know the details and the history and can explain it. It just makes a huge difference to your whole experience. And I think, as you're saying now, you've got people now who are just opening up stuff that you've seen all along but just didn't understand about. But I think one of the things that I've always wanted to know more about is the sharks, and that's something that you have a bit of a speciality in, isn't it? That you've studied a lot of sharks and their behavior, etc.
Yeah, so I mean, we're very fortunate, as I said previously. The Great Barrier Reef has, for more intents and purposes, an intact shark population. We have an incredible diversity of sharks, and there's lots of them that you see and that you're used to seeing on dives or snorkels. There's 35 different species of carcarana just in the marine park that you'll never see, that live in murky water or live in rivers or live a little bit deeper. And what we see and what we're very lucky to have on the Great Barrier Reef is the ability to interact with these animals safely in their environment, and they're not inhibited or not impacted by baits. So on a normal day when you go onto the reef, you're snorkeling with your family, and you have the daughter around the neck, and she's holding on. She's got a stinger suit on. She's looking down, and she can see a white-tip reef shark, swim past, like 3 feet, and she gets to have her first experience with a shark in its natural environment, just cruising over a reef. It's not heightened behavior. You're not in the water with 50 other people, and there's a bait in the water. The animals aren't acting differently, and it's the difference between that natural interaction and somewhere else where you can go out to a site where they're baiting sharks, big pelagic sharks, up to the surface of the water. And it does make for fantastic photos, but it's contrived. It's not the same as you're out there on a normal snorkel and you just happen to see this animal go past, and you're so appreciative because it means the marine park protection's working. The animal's safe.
It's not an authentic. It's not authentic as opposed to a lot of these where they're chumming and so on. And 100 other people. Yeah, it makes a big difference.
Yeah, it really does. And there's lots of people who listen to this will go, look, if I was in the water with a shark, I would, I'd freak out. In 10 years of guiding and being in the water the whole life, if anyone ever says shark when we're snorkeling, everybody swims towards it. It's amazing. You have all these preconceived ideas, and even people who have strong phobias of the water, and these are probably the people that I respect the most, have a fear of the water, can't swim, travel across the world to come out into a boat, and then they use a pool noodle under their arms, and they are going to put a mask and snorkel on for the first time and trust you to go out and see the reef, because for their life, it's been we have these seminal places, Serengeti, Big Sky, and the migration, Antarctica, the Great Barrier Reef, Yellowstone, these key places around the world which call people, and they can't explain. They can't explain. When you've been to Africa, the dirt gets into your skin, and then you dream of her forever.
Yeah, and you can't explain it to anybody until once they've been there, then they suddenly realize what it's all about. Yes.
Yeah, and anyone who works in Antarctica, like we call it the polar bug, because once you have it, you dream of that cold environment because it's so foreign. And the ocean and the reef, there's a connection there where it's an alien world, but it's very familiar. And it's the complexities that we have in our own environments, but also it's very simple. And you can not move. I've watched people sit on a pool noodle for an hour in front of one piece of coral, which is my favorite thing to do. And they see the daily patterns of life for an entire ecosystem in a space that's 1/2 meter by 1/2 meter. Having not swum before or not snorkel before. And that, as a guide, that's what I want. I love guiding for top-end photographers, and I like taking people around the world, whether it's anthropogenic stuff they're looking for or cultural stuff. But for me, it's taking someone who multi-generational families, grandparents or parents that have had a great experience in the environment, want to take their adult kids and their grandkids back and have it as a family, or people have had that desire to go to somewhere that they've seen in a National Geographic magazine or they've seen on a documentary, and it's called to them. And as a guide, maybe you have 10 days or 14 days. The guide every day has this huge amount of pressure, because if it's your lifelong dream to share this place with your family, it's on you. It's on the guide to, it doesn't matter. We don't
to deliver. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like if the animals aren't here and the weather's not good, that's when the guide is good. Anyone can go. You can fluke a river crossing at Masai Mara. You can fluke seeing something great on the reef, but it's when the weather's bad and there's no options. It's that's when the guide comes into their own, and that knowledge of that place is really important.
Are there any particular areas of the reef that you are particularly fond of, in or outside of open to the public? What's your favorite?
I have recently fallen back in love with a few places and a few new loves, actually. Always the far north, from Cairns up to Lizard Island during the austral winter. June, July, August, we have dwarf minke whales come, and there are a few places in the world you can swim with whales, all different whales, sperm whales and humpback whales, southern right whales, and also minkies. The minkies are the only ones which choose to interact. So rather than taking a Zodiac and taking a flail boat, getting in front of the animals, jumping in and hoping they go past, we're stopping the boat and we are waiting, and we jump into the water, and then the animals choose to come to you.
That's awesome. That's always so much better if they're coming to you, I suppose, because it's more of a natural behavior as well then, as opposed to a forced view. You know, you're forcing them to change their whole behavior by interfering with the directions they're going, etc.
Yeah, and then when we're in the water, everybody that gets out of the water says that the whale came all the way from Antarctica just to see them. Everybody. Even the people that are far too cool and have got all the camera gear and they've seen everything before and they've dived everywhere before, and this is just another dive on their list. They've got a 6-meter minke whale coming a foot away from them, stopping in the water and hovering. And with the mammal eye, it's our eye. It's looking back with you, and there's some understanding there.
Some sort of connection. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's choosing to be with you. It's not running past you. It's not trying to mate with something. It's not trying to feed. It is only there in that moment to interact with you. And that's, so in terms of megafauna for me, that's by far the best experience in winter. The Great Keppel Islands down south of Rockhampton, I had never been to before. One of the Master Reef Guides, Sam Appleton and James Unsworth and Johnny Gaskell took me down there in July. That place has had the worst coral bleaching on the Great Barrier Reef over 3 successive bleaching events. The level of coral diversity on the reefs and the level of recovery, I haven't seen anything like that anywhere else. Not in the north, not in the midsections, not in the outer reefs. That Great Keppel group was completely off my radar, and it was sublime.
And what's led to the recovery? What's behind that?
So that's a great question. The best thing that we have for the reef right now, if you think about the reef like a Jenga stack, if all the blocks are in place, you have a very resilient reef, and it can take a bleaching event, no problems, and it can take a cyclone, no problems, or crown of thorns. But what you do on reefs around the world is you start taking out these blocks, and each of the blocks has a different level of stability that it offers. When you start talking about water quality and overfishing and no sanitation for the local population, then you remove all the resilience. Yeah. One of the things you're seeing on the reef is that when the coral is stressed and it's bleached, there's the ability for algae to push across and smother the coral. If you have intact fish assemblages, which takes us back to the start of the talk, one of the only places in the world where you can go and see top predators, mesopredators, planktivores, herbivores intact, these are helping buffer. They're in no way, absolutely in no way, a replacement for action to reduce our emissions and to stem sea temperature change, but they do buffer against it. And you can travel around the world, and if you've been in the Caribbean, you see urchin gardens, you see no herbivorous fish. Those environments are forever changed because they don't have these fish species. So the Great Keppel Islands and those guys were amazing, but it depends on really what you want to see. The best reef for me might not be, if you really you have a young family and you're really active, then you want to go and see James Unsworth and ocean rafting and go to Whitehaven Beach and do some snorkeling in the Whitsundays. If you have a multi-generational family or a couple of couples and you want to see this incredible whale experience, then you want to come to Cairns and you want to go out and do minke whales. If you've dived with friends or a couple or your family's getting to diving and you really want that immersive experience, then you want to come and do 4 to 6 days up on the reef doing some outer reef diving. Or you do it all and then you do a mix of the World Heritage Area for the rainforest. And I just went with one of the Daintree Ice Cream Company also owns Daintree Wonder Tours. And during COVID, we went out one night spotlighting. Not a tour, just one of the guides jumped in his car and we went for a drive. 3 hours later, I was absolutely positive I knew nothing. He was
That's amazing. Yeah.
Justin Days he was enamored, like every bug, every reptile, every amphibian. It was amazing. And so, you have this ability to go between two World Heritage areas that touch, one of the only places in the world that's possible.
Yeah.
And so you can pick between cultural sites, you can go to rock art sites up out of Laura, you can see the Daintree, try and come and find the cassowary, swim in amazing streams, and then come out in the reef and do it all in a very, very short distance. Australia is renowned for, like, you drive 12 hours in Europe, you drive through 15 countries.
Sure.
Drive 12 hours in Queensland, you're still in Queensland. But on the reef, you have this, you can connect between the ecosystem from the mountain range through the mangroves, all the way through the inshore reefs out to the outer reef, and move between, have different experiences within that ecosystem.
Yeah, it all sounds fantastic. And I think we're all looking forward to being able to experience a lot more of that. And hopefully there will be people experiencing a lot more of it and traveling out that way. Not too much though. But yeah, we'll have getting there.
Look, I think we have to establish a couple of things. I think that the idea that COVID will soon be over is the wrong mindset, because as we've just seen from the northern suburbs cluster, we can change very quickly in what is required with one person breaching quarantine. We've seen in Britain yesterday that there's a new strain in Britain. In South Africa, the same. And so this is going to be an ongoing process. And so what we need to do is start to move into what's an incredible way to travel with these new environment. And ironically, it's making people get to the same place that you and I know always has worked for 2 decades, which is traveling in small groups with people you know. And the idea of the medical profession is saying bubble, but for you and I, what it is ensuring that the person you sit next to on the aircraft is the person you want to sit next to on the aircraft. The person that you're on the boat with and eating dinner with is the person that you love and want to share this experience with, not a person who you've never met, and then you have that couple of days of trying to work out where they're at. And what you end up with is these incredible intimate experiences and there's no people. That it's turning the clock back in tourism 2 or 3 decades in Australia to what was
how it all started. And and then of course also going back to the fantastic guides who know it all, and well, not know it all, but have a passion about it and are able to open up that passion to you as well.
Yeah, and look, I think that's what's going to happen with guides around the world is anyone who was about 5 years ago, it became very fashionable to be a guide. And so there was a huge growth in industry, and tourism was very profitable, and especially, I touched the word expedition tourism. Very vague term, became very trendy and very profitable. It's great until it goes wrong, until the ship breaks down, until there's a storm, until there's a medical emergency, and then the people with the experience, you only want to be in the room when they're around. And what we'll see from the pandemic is the companies that come through on the other end are the ones that 2020 was the pandemic, but they were operating fleets of aircrafts and ships after 9/11. They operated during SARS. They've operated during the GFC. They've had medical emergencies. They've done beyond anything that we could do individually. They have a body of knowledge and expertise that they lean on in these times. And I think those groups will continue to keep going. What we'll lose will be the people that were half in, or people that saw profit margins but went in it for the long term.
Yep, no, I think that's absolutely right. And it's going to be interesting to see how many of us actually manage to come through in the tourism industry on the other side. But I'm certainly excited about it. It's a lot more is opening up to us, which has actually been quite eye-opening for us in particular, and looking forward to that. Jimmy, I think we can cut it short there, and but hopefully we'll be able to catch up with you again sometime and find out more probably about Papua New Guinea or somewhere like that, and chat more about some of these other destinations that you're spending quite a bit of time in.
Yeah, I think we need a whole another conversation about what we've just been doing in New Guinea, because for you and I, our great loves are the continent, and landing in New Guinea felt very, very familiar very quickly.
Right.
And it has that same life, it has that very, very visceral. It's alive, it's present, there's no tomorrow. It's very, what's happening now is very dynamic. And the only other place that ever had that was on the plains in Arusha, North Africa, Etosha, in Namibia. So it's a really exciting place to be working.
And it's slowly opening up, and they're really quite crying for tourism as well at the moment.
Yeah, well, and I think what we'll find here in Australia, and this is a huge thing, if people take one thing away from this conversation, would be that this idea of custom travel used to be, well, you have to be uber wealthy to travel in a custom way or in a small group. But if you do the math for a generic two adults, 2.5 children, or you put two families together, very, very quickly, rather than buying 9 spots on a day boat, you can have your own small ship with world-class food and world-class guiding, and you get to choose where you go and how you get there. The same thing for moving overland, the difference between staying in an incredible resort with 300 people or staying in your own accommodation with a chef that makes sure that you have exactly what you want all the time. The beauty with that is that you have the experience you want curated, but also in COVID, you have the safety because you're reducing those interactions with people who you don't know, and you don't know where they were 24 hours ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've seen anything, and literally stepping off the plane this morning in Cairns, the first question from the police are at the border: show me your Queensland driver's license, show us where you've been the last 24 hours. And if you've been from New South Wales, then you step into a separate line. That ability to mitigate that with custom travel, I think, is where you and I will be for the next 18 months.
Absolutely. No, well, I certainly hope that we're going to be carrying on that route. So great. Thanks, Jimmy. I really appreciate that. And we'll catch up with you soon. We've been talking with Dr. Jimmy White, an Australian scientist, educator, and expedition leader. Jimmy's passion has always been the Great Barrier Reef, and that is where he did his doctorate. And now he is coming back to focus on this. Jimmy's also been talking about some of the benefits of having a private guide, especially in today's world with COVID and the pandemic, and how this keeps you within the so-called bubble. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to joining you again next time.